Hello, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to another interview.
Hi, my name is Jenna, and today we have another guest music therapist with us. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Suzanne Oliver. I am a board certified music therapist and a neurologic music therapy fellow. I am executive director and founder of Neurologic Music Therapy Services of Arizona, which is an NMT clinic in Phoenix.
Suzanne, tell us a little bit about how you found out about music therapy and decided this was a profession that you wanted to explore.
Sure. I was a sophomore in high school, and I took a career class where we took a test. I'm probably one of the few that actually worked on. I filled out all the information, and then when you were done, back old school, as many years ago, you got a number, and then you went to the card catalog and you dug through and pulled out the card that was like the profession. And when I pulled it out, it was music therapy. And I read the card. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. So since I was a sophomore in high school, that's been my track.
That's really cool. I like that. That's a unique story. So what was your process then, since being a sophomore, then those next couple of years, finding a college that worked for you? What was really important for you when finding a college?
Well, probably the most important thing was financial. We had once I learned about music therapy, prior to music therapy, I was going to either major in English or math, and teach somewhere. And so once I discovered music therapy, then I discovered there was actually a program in Arizona and 20 minutes from my house. So that was the ruling factor. I think back then there were less programs than there were now, and I didn't go any further because when I looked into that program and met the professor there, Betty Ezer and Howry, she was actually a student of Thayer Gaston, the father of music therapy in the United States. And so meeting her, I just knew that that was the place I was going to go. And of course, it cost not very much. So
That's it, nice.
yes.
When thinking back on your college experience and your music therapy education as a whole, what are some things that you really liked about that education experience? And what are things that if you could go back, you would want to see change or grow?
I think what I liked the most, and I know that has shaped me as a therapist, was that Mrs. Howry was a pioneer in the field, and she was Gaston's like student assistant and also like sent out to develop college programs. And so she had this really steadfast way of staying focused on the mission and encouraging people to grow and expand. The two big things, which still are very much part of who I am as a therapist, was the brain and relationship. And so a lot of people don't know that really Thayer Gaston and Bill Sears, kind of those beginning pioneers, were really focused on the brain and that medical relationship approach. So that's what Mrs. Howry brought to it. She always stressed therapeutic relationship, but also stressed understanding the science. I've always said that if she was alive today, she would be a neurologic music therapist, I think. So that was meaningful to me. And then just the broad scope of the education. My understanding now is not all programs are doing like anatomy, physiology, and neuroscience. And I would say that I was really excited that was a part, even though it was very different back then, 40 years ago. It was very much a part of the program. And so I would that's one big thing I think is people are looking for programs that I think that neuroscience approach is so important.
Can you share a little bit about during that time what really shaped? I know you've shared a little bit about it. What shaped your theoretical orientation and what you practice today and what that really means to you?
That idea of pioneering and we're pioneers in the use of music, right? And how it impacts people. And so I think that idea that it's not you get out of school and you're good to go, but rather this is a continuous learning process. And so every class I took like that. It was like, okay, I'm learning this, but I have to keep learning. It's not like, okay, now that's check off and I have that in my tool chest, but rather I need to continue to grow. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then as we have learned more about the brain, which obviously impacts relationship, right? They're not, emotion and relationship is not separate from the neuroscience piece, because we all have a brain and that's what helps us be who we are. So that's my that's my answer. I'm not sure if that answered directly what you were talking about, but
Looking forward into internship experience and sort of the end of the beginning, I guess you would say, of the music therapy degree, what was your experience like searching for internships? Is that something that came relatively easy to you? And where do you feel like your internship experience helped you grow the most in the beginnings of your career?
that's a good question. Back then, again, over 40 years ago, there weren't as many, I think, internships, and definitely not in the medical area. So Mrs. Howry had really strong relationships with a lot of music therapists throughout the country. And I utilized her expertise really in terms of making an initial list. The place that I interned was Milwaukee County Mental Health Center. And one of the big things, a couple of the things that really drove me to choose that were one, that there was someone there who had been practicing for a long time. So they had a really strong base. And the other thing was that there were 6 music therapists working in that program. And so I felt like I could really learn and have, more vast experience in that way. Even though it was psych, I felt like that underlying understanding would help me in whatever area I ended up being in.
So finishing up internship, looking towards CBMT exam, what was that like? How has that kind of changed? And what do you recommend to people today that are working on the exam and trying to pass?
Sure. I giggle because obviously my experience was a long time ago. And when I graduated, we didn't even have CBMT, did not even exist. So they came into being, I think, in 1983. And so that was 2 to 3 years after I graduated. We were all grandfathered in.
Okay.
So there was no exam, there was no renewal process. And so we were all, that group of people pre-83 were all grandfathered into the program. So I did not have to go through the stress that you all go through now. However, when the recertification process occurred, then we had that choice of, do you take the exam or do you develop continuing education? I actually worked for CBMT for 10.5 years. I was on their board of directors for 5, and 3 of those 5, I was the chair of the board. After that, I became the regulatory affairs advisor for them. So I kind of charted that position that helps with regulation and all of that. So I am obviously a really strong fan of board certification. I was on the exam committee and was board liaison to the exam committee. So I know the test well, and actually had to take it many times because that's what the exam committee does to ensure that the items are good. So your question in terms, what would I say to people? I would say, don't worry. Be happy. No, I'm I would say the test measures competency. And I think people get all freaked out because it's like what you learned in school. Hopefully your school experience gives you the knowledge base, right, to take the exam. But the purpose of the exam is not to test your schooling. The purpose of the exam is to protect the public. And so we're looking at minimal competency, and that's not like beginner competency. It is for the time period in which the exam is done. So, let's say 2023 right now, that people are able to safely practice. So I'd say talk to a lot of clinicians, go outside your box of school. Be careful in terms of how you choose your internship programs, because internships really solidify and grow your knowledge base. But don't be afraid of it. Just take the test. And if for some reason you do fail, figure out what it was. Was it test anxiety? Was it that there was a complete, miss in a certain area? And just regroup and go at it. That was my CBMT talking, I think so.
Yeah. I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit on what the process is like being on the exam committee. I feel like it's often something that people find as sort of like a mysterious entity that people create the exam, and how that process was for you, and really what it was like going through and looking at all the questions and seeing what that was like for people.
Sure. CBMT is one of the highest integrity organization I've ever partnered with. Yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions, but or CBMT, I'm not speaking for them now, no longer work for them, but support them in many ways. The exam committee works closely with a testing company, and everything is psychometrically validated. So people think, that people are in a room and we're just coming up with test questions. But the test questions are all linked to a scope of practice. I think they call it the domains, right? The domains now. And every item has to be linked to a specific practice domain. And so there's this whole process that goes through. Every 5 years, they do a practice analysis, and I've sat on that committee many times, where a team of experts, so experts in the field, clinicians and educators, etc., come together and develop. They review the previous practice domain and look at, are these the items that we all think currently are important for people practicing? And then what's missing? Like the neuroscience piece for a long time was missing. And now that's, a part of the practice domains. But the team looks at that, and then we develop a questionnaire, and then that goes out to practicing clinicians, because those are the people that know what it takes to be out there. So that goes out, and then the questionnaire comes back, and the exam committee with the testing company reviews all the data. It's like, how many people thought this item, maybe this item was important 10 years ago, and now it's thrown out because it's really not. So that whole process then develops the new practice domains that the test items are connected to. And there's a certain number, like there's weight in each of the areas. So a certain number of questions that have to be in each of those areas. And then the items are tested. So everyone thinks, we just made up these items and now this is the new test. But that's not it at all. Once the items are developed, they go in as practice items. And so they're in there. They're not identified to the people that are taking a test, but they're in there. And then the testing company pulls out, comes to the group and says, okay, here are the really high scorers. They're all missing this item. So obviously, if all the high scorers are passing all the items, it's like, okay, those are good test items. So they look at all the metrics on that and bring that to the exam committee. Then those that aren't, they're like, okay, is there a problem with this is it not clear enough? Is there a problem with the choices that are given? You know, it's like you have to really, what each of those items are written really well, so there's not the silly, silly question that's an obvious wrong answer, because we want the whole test to be really valid in that way. So there's this whole process that we go through. And then once the test is developed and those items are developed, then everyone on the exam committee has to take the exam. So that's where I said I never took it as a therapist, but I took it many times on the board committee, because if we're there and we understand the whole process and we're missing the items, then there's a big problem. So once all of that is done, then items are secure, and so there's a pool of items for every single thing on the domains. And then the exam committee, obviously their computers and stuff mix all that up and make sure and produce the test. But it's a very rigorous process. It's not controlled by one person, and it's certainly not random in how things are made up.
Seems very intricate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It really is. If you ever get the chance to sit on the exam committee, I mean, I got asked to be the liaison the first year I was with CBMT, and I was so excited about it. When I became chair, that was one of the things I had to get off the exam committee. I was like, I don't want to do that. But yeah, it's a very intricate process, but it's a huge learning opportunity for anyone out there who wants to do that. And people that are on the committee are not just seasoned. On the practice analysis, there's seasoned people, but on the exam committee, we have to have a certain number of like new people too, so that there's percentages of who those people are. So yeah, it's great. Yay, CBMT. If you ever get to serve, it's a great organization.
I think they're currently looking for filling some positions too. I think they said,
Yes, yeah, they just put out willingness to serve, so
yeah.
check it out.
Yeah.
So kind of in a similar sort of vein, thinking about continuing education, what has been really interesting to you over the years? What do you find the most valuable? And maybe some things that you're interested in currently as well.
Well, obviously, because because I am a neurologic music therapist, I've done 5 fellowships, which the fellowship process is presenting your work and having it critiqued by fellow fellows. So I'd say all of my continuing education now, since I've been in NMT, which I took the first training in 1999, everything I do is geared towards that, because that's my practice. I mean, I changed the name of my organization to reflect that we only do neurologic music therapy. So neuroscience, keeping up with the brain, autism is my specialty area. So keeping up with the new things that we're finding about brain connectivity and autism and those differences, that excites me. I love that. I also love to present and talk with people and partner with people. So those are probably the biggest areas for me for continuing ed. But I'd say, again, if we're looking at talking to students and young professionals, follow your passion, but also make sure that the continuing education you take is really high-end, high integrity, because that does get questioned continuously. So make sure it matches up, 1, with the practice domains with board certification, but 2, that you're seeking outside of the profession too, to inform and educate yourself.
In terms of supervision, how do you feel like you best receive supervision, and what really works for you in terms of receiving supervision? And how does that incorporate into your style for being a supervisor and a mentor for other students and professionals?
Sure. I appreciate partnering with people and just coming to the table, being open and honest, and revealing what our struggles and what our successes. And so when I work with people that mentor me, that's really how I approach it. I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to put out my queries. I'm going to put out the things I know well, but also the things I need to know. And that's really the way I mentor a lot of NMTs and supervise all the therapists that we currently have. We have 6 therapists in my organization. I supervise all of them, and then also the interns that we have. And my approach is really that of just, let's come together and, what are your questions? What is your focus now? And I think it's important that it's not just textbooky. People think of NMT and it's really not that at all. But coming into it, and I think you should always have questions as a clinician. I would say that's what helps me thrive every day, is I always have questions. So I try to encourage people. When I first started supervising people, they seemed like they were afraid to have questions, right? And it's like they're wanting information, but it's like, I don't want to expose myself. And I think it's important to be exposed, because then that's how you learn. That's how we function at our clinic in terms of supporting people. And I think that's really important. So again, find a supervisor who isn't trying to, that's the other thing, who isn't trying to tell you everything they know, because that's not how I will walk into it. I don't want to tell you everything I know. I want to excite you about learning and show you ways to learn and ways to treat. In closing on this question, I would say too that in NMT, there is a whole model that assists with that, and that's the transformational design model, the TDM, that really is a great tool for supervising and for learning. So I utilize that with everybody.
When selecting interns at your clinic, what are things that you're really looking for, some traits as they're coming in that makes a strong candidate?
I'm looking for people that aren't coming out thinking they know everything, to be honest, but rather people that have questions and people that have a desire for long time learning, because that is, again, the most important thing. I look at that same thing when we're hiring. I just hired a new therapist this morning, and excited about it. And one of the biggest things I'm looking for is, someone who's not complacent, who's not status quo, who says, I've got everything here, but rather someone that's looking to grow and learn. And so that's the biggest thing I look for with interns, that they are confident, but also confident to be not confident, if that makes sense. And then an openness. Obviously, music skills are important, so we absolutely look at that too. I look for time balance. Is this going to pull away from the team? Like, does the person have such struggles that they're going to pull our resources, and too many resources, for things that they should already be coming out of school with? And I will say there's, a lot of my colleagues talk about folks coming out of school with not good music skills. So if you're a student out there listening to this, really develop your guitar skills, work on your voice. You can always, we have people that sometimes come out and maybe can't keep a pitch, but there's simple things that can be taught to change that, so it's like, if someone's told you you'll never be able to do this, there are ways. We're music therapists, we can help with that, but don't give up on yourself, but also don't stop developing your skills.
I'm curious, transitioning a little bit into NMT. I feel personally as though when I took the NMT training, it was the first time that I'd heard NMT being used really within people on the spectrum, within the community of autism and all of that stuff. Jenna, I feel like you're agreeing. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit about how that connection came to you, and how really you kind of dove into using NMT in that way?
Sure. Pre-NMT, the first training, which was in 1999, I had been employing music therapists for like 18 years, and I had a passion in the area of autism and was pursuing like the neuroscience of when people were first coming out, non-speaking persons, and sharing their stories and things. And it was like, okay, I need to understand this so I can understand what my role is. So I had spent about 99, so yeah, like 10 years digging in that place. And we were, that was the work that we were doing at our facility. I saw Dr. Tout and Dr. Corrine Hurtout give a presentation at a conference. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. So that was pre that training. I went back and I took because I didn't understand the techniques at the time, but I was like, oh, these labels will be really good. And we put it in all our stuff and everything. And then the first training was offered. So 5 of us went. And we had been studying like the neuroscience of autism. And we went, and I think I had the same impression as you guys did. It was rehab, right? Everything was like neuro rehab. But when I went, through those 4 days, and we were all staying together, it was like all these lights were going on in terms of how we could apply that information. And it wasn't we were the only people in that training. There were only 20 people in there, but we were the only ones with the developmental disability background. But we came back and applied the information, and we're seeing changes. So, and now, as you guys know, because you've took the training more recently, that like a large percentage of people are treating in the area of developmental disabilities who are NMTs. So NMT, and that is, I think, one of the things, and we're really working to clarify it in the academy. One of the misnomers is that it's taught in school as an approach, a music therapy approach. Mm-hmm. And it's really not an approach. It's not a model. It's a treatment system that music therapists, PTs, OTs, speech, etc. can work in too. So I think that's part of what happens with students is you hear of it and you're taught, about GIM and about this and that and NMT, where once you take the training, you just see, right? It's a treatment system to address function in the brain, no matter what your diagnostics are.
It was something that I think both of us, after going and being a part of the training, appreciated, and a large part, I think, of what we use in our work day to day is with that. And we use it some with other populations as well, but a lot of the clients that we work with are people with different developmental disabilities and diagnoses, and so that was a really big part of it for us going through that training. Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit more? I know regulation is a big part of that for you as well. Can you share a little bit about what you do with your work with that of people on the autism spectrum and regulation, and how you use that in your sessions? Sure.
That's you guys have heard me. It's how much time do I have? It's a huge part. Again, I think historically, because I feel this way too for myself, that oftentimes we don't think so much about the brain unless someone has like a traumatic brain injury or stroke or something like that. When thinking about that, we all have brains and they all are impacted. We all know that we're impacted by music. That's why we're doing the work we're doing, right? I think regulation, people with developmental disabilities and then autism specifically are approached from, that kind of social communication, control your body piece, where a lot of the people that we work with are, as you said, dysregulated. They have regulation issues, meaning they can't necessarily control their arousal level and maintain alertness for learning, or bring themselves back if they overshoot. So we know that rhythm is the strongest sensory input. We know that rhythm is the strongest element in music, and that changes our arousal level. And again, we all use music to do that. We listen to certain songs to clean our houses. We listen to certain music before we go to bed. And it varies. Back when I was in school, in fact, I think one of my first papers I wrote was about types of music linked to like different things, to different emotions. I look at that now and I just laugh at that. It's like, oh, that's really goofy. But that was the thing. Oh, someday, in music therapy, it'll be like, listen to this Bach etude and it'll do this for you, But we all know we all regulate differently. And I think in the area of developmental disabilities, people forget that. Like, it's just like, let me help you be more like me, And so we use music, we use rhythm specifically. We know it can change the brain within 3 to 4 beats. And so a lot of the work we do, whether it's just with a metronome for someone who's screaming and kicking and crying, and use rhythm for that change, or for others in terms of instrumental work. I mean, it's pretty big. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's not something that's a one and done thing. You guys know that, right? It's like constant, but it's very impacting, and can make a difference for somebody being more of who they are. That's the other thing, is people think NMT is not about the human person, and it's so about the human person. Right? Transfer is in the TDM. If you don't have buy-in with the people that you're working with on their goals, there's no point. Dr. Michael Taut always says that. If your client if it's not something they want to work on, why are you even working on it? People have to get regulated so that you can then engage more readily with them. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, you're good. In a similar vein, I know you touched on this a little bit, and I feel like a lot of it was implicitly stated in what you had said, but in terms of getting that combination of NMT within this developmental disability population, while also bringing in anti-ableist practices and letting those two things meet in the middle, how do you find the best way to go about doing that for you with your clients, to make sure that you're still able to work on the goals without dipping into, like you had said, it not being about the human person and et cetera, and letting those ableist practices come in?
I think it's just inherent in what we do, like constantly partnering. We presume competence, whether someone's able to demonstrate that in their body. The person that's walking around, pacing, climbing up and down things, we talk to the same way as we talk to anyone. So I think it's really, I can't imagine doing it another way. So I don't know we don't talk to anyone different. I mean, that's when people come to our clinic, that's a comment that people make, either students coming in to observe or parents. They're like, you talk to them so different. And it's like, we just talk to them like I'm talking to you, And I think that's how we do it. People come in and they feel respected and they feel seen. And then we help them. The more I know about the brain, and the more I know about what's going on with connectivity, and the more I know about how my tool works, then I can impart that in a session at whatever level. And I can share with people, what's going on with their bodies versus them just feeling that they're different. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times, and this gets shared later on when people do have communication methods, like the first time, like being understood. It's like you explain to me about what's happening versus I'm just this bad person who my mom constantly yells at and whose school is trying to control me and all of that. So I think that bringing in the neuroscience, bringing in that idea of partnering together, understanding our tool, so I can say, this is why I'm asking you to do these things. Yeah, music can be fun, but you're here to be more of who you are. And having fun can be part of who you are, but also learning to regulate your body can allow you to be more of who you are. So I think there's ableist is a relatively new thing. in terms of language and what you guys are learning in school. Back in my day, we didn't learn that at all. But like I said, Mrs. Howery was very relationship based, and that idea that you engage with that person, you respect everybody's differences, and you just enter into it as two people coming in to partner together.
Yeah. I think I like the idea of partnership. I don't know if Jenna, you feel this way, but a lot of, not necessarily folks within that community, but even anybody that I use NMT techniques with sometimes have the misconception of like, oh, this is being used to fix whatever this issue is. And I'm always like, no, that's not what we're here for.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's so important to express. Yeah, you're not fixing, because I will say that people at times have challenged, even in the trainings, like thinking that NMT is kind of an ableist thing, right? And how I look at it is you're freeing people up to make their own decisions, right? So if someone wants to express themselves in a certain way, they're able to do that, versus especially, I don't know about the folks that you're working with, but a lot of the people I work with are very dysregulated and have a lot of body challenges where they're not being able to be who they are. So I think that idea of someone can choose to do something or not. Like right now, I mean, you guys, you're choosing to be here and in this interview with me, but you could very well choose to, by something I say, to get up and walk out of the room, and you have that choice. But a lot of the people we work with don't have that choice. And so our tool gives them that freedom. Sure, you may want to go ahead and, play with the same thing over and over, and now you can do that. You can also choose to get up and walk away. So sorry, I went a little rant there, but it's what we're doing is like the most humanistic thing that you can do, and that is helping people be more of who they are and have more options in their lives. So
kind of looking back in time a little further, what was it like looking for your first music therapy job? What was really important to you? What were you looking for? And how has that kind of changed as you've looked for different jobs, opened your own organization?
So I laugh at that because I've never really had a real job. I don't even know if I could work for somebody. I probably could, but so here in Arizona, there were only 2 jobs in the whole state. One of them was at the university when I graduated. So when I went to Milwaukee, one of my things, because I'd seen all the previous people that graduated with me leave the state because there were no jobs. And so when I went to Milwaukee and I knew they had multiple positions there, I was like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get a job there, but then being an Arizona native, I was really called back home. So I didn't my first job was creating my company. Now within that, my first contracts and things, there were some things like my very first contract was in a mental health setting. And of course, that made sense to me because I had just interned with that. And so I had comfort zones and I had to push myself out of my comfort zones for different things. But the only job I've ever really had is as founder and executive director of NMTSA. Pre that, I worked in group homes. I worked in an adult developmental home when I was in school. And kind of, I was always like, I'll never take a job except one that applies to my career, so, but that was me. Anyways, I don't know if that answered your question. Again, I lack experience of having many jobs.
That feels like a success for you.
Yeah. So I guess then my question would be, what was that like of coming right out of an internship, being a very young professional and starting an organization?
It was scary.
Yeah.
You know, I've never been like a thing person, you know, so I didn't come out and I'm like, I've got to make this much money by this and that. I came out as a pioneer. In fact, when I wanted to do this, even my own family thought I was a little nuts, but I would go over to Mrs. Howery's house and I would hang out with her. She'd be in her garden planting things, and I'd sit there and just talk about my ideas that I wanted to do. And she encouraged me. But it was a little scary because back then, like now, right? Lots of people have private practices. Back then, nobody, the only thing that existed that was like doing community stuff was the music settlement group that's in Ohio, I think. That was Anita Steele is the one person I went to when I was starting, like, because that was the only thing that I could even see that was vaguely, and it's not really like what we're doing, but that was it. So it was scary, but I knew in my heart that that was the work I was to do, you know. And so I've coached a lot of people in private practice and starting companies, and I pretty much can tell the people that are going to succeed and not, just by, you have to be doing the work that you feel you're meant to do, because it's really hard to start a practice. It's really hard to go out in front of people. And the interesting thing for me, because there was nobody else doing it, I always presented myself as a we, not that I was lying, but I always spoke about the organization versus just myself. And I look at that now, I think that kind of gave me the confidence behind, you know, that it was a bigger vision than just me starting a practice, you know. And if someone would ask, you know, well, you know, who else is, I'd be like, oh, it's just me now, you know. And I'd be honest, I would never lie, but I think just having that feeling that it was bigger than just me was helpful.
I'm curious about, as you were beginning your organization and growing through with all these different facets that you had to juggle in terms of clinical work, but also training, but also managing the administrative aspects, things like that. How did self-care really play into that for you? And how did you maintain a balance between all the different hats that you were wearing?
Well, again, back in my day, we didn't talk about self-care. But I think it played a huge part, you know. My faith, I'm a very faith-based person. And so that got me through a lot of things. Exercise. I mean, I think I did what you guys call self-care now, just things that are integrated into my life, right? So I think it's super important, if that's the gut of your question. I think taking care of yourself, I won't lie to say that in 40 years, I didn't have things that took me other places, relationships that took me other places, you know, where I kind of lost that balance. And so I'd say to people, you know, stay true to yourself, and no matter what, and yeah, take time for yourself.
Being part of the academy, being a fellow, working with so many people here in the States, but also internationally, what has that been like for you, when the different things that you learn from all of the people that you mentor and get to meet and learn with? How is that?
It's awesome. One word, awesome. You know, when I got asked, Dr. Kareen asked me to just do a presentation in 2014 at the national conference where they were doing the training. And I was so nervous, right? Because it was like sharing my work in a larger arena in front of people that I respect very much. But what I discovered in that, and hopefully you guys have seen in the training, that they're very much just really real people. And so I think the relationships that I've built with them in the training process and the time that we've spent together in the live trainings, I think helped me see again just the humanness of people. And so the trainings I enter into like that, I mean, it's exciting. It's lovely to see all the different see people all over the world and the things going on. and to also see that we have a tool, right? Music is a universal language, but it's beyond that, right? It's like everyone has a brain too. And it doesn't matter if you're, in Spain or Nicaragua or, Canada. It's to have that common ability to engage is really exciting. And I think it's really important to have relationships. I have relationships again all over the world, and the mentees, it's exciting to me to see people just get excited and passionate about their work, and then see people. The cool thing is that pockets of people that are growing things. I still do love that here in the United States, to watch people grow, but then to see struggling music therapists in other countries that once they do NMT, they're starting their own businesses, they're employing other people, things are just exploding. That's exciting for me. So awesome and exciting, 2 words.
Now that we've talked about back in the past and kind of your work now, in terms of the future, where do you feel like the profession is headed in the future? Where would you like to see it grow? Where do you think it's already growing? And where do you think that music therapists can take steps to make that happen? Big one.
Yeah, that's an interview in itself.
Yeah.
I feel like the neuroscience piece is so foundational, and that was actually brought to our organization many years ago to be foundation. So I think in terms of going in the future, that in order to remain legitimate, and I'm not selling an MT, but right now I think it is best practice. But I think any music therapist, because we know how the brain is being changed, it's so important to understand that. So I would like to see that more integrated into school programs. I would like to see more uniformity is what's coming to mind, but I don't mean that like in a negative way. I mean, for the competencies for what's being taught in each of the schools to be right now, it seems like, and it's always been that way, I think, this school is known for this and this is that. And so depending on the school you choose, which again, I think you're offering this information, to people, I think this is really cool what you're doing, because people need to really dig into what's happening in the school program and what is their focus and how does that focus translate into jobs and into competency in the field in general. So I think that I would like to see more uniformity at the bachelor's level before we even look at it at the master's level. And that's, I think, what CBMT brings to the table, because it doesn't matter where you went, they're just measuring competency,
Yeah.
And so the pass rates will reflect what's happening in the education arena. So I'd like to see that. I'm hopeful for the organization, but I think there are a lot of people and a lot of egos and things get sidetracked, and that's unfortunate, because that group of people back in the beginning, Mrs. Howery, Bob, it's interesting because Dr. Michael Tout, his professor was Bob Unkefer, who the academy is named after. Bob was really good friends with Betty. And so when I would go to conferences, it's like they would, play card games and stuff in their rooms. And so he was a pioneer too, and they really encourage people to pioneer it. And I think that has gotten a little bit lost in our field, in protecting the self versus what are we doing to support people outside.
Speaking in terms of advocacy, what do you recommend for advocacy? How have you built those skills over the years, and how do you maybe teach that to mentees as well?
I mean, I developed the skills out of necessity.
Yeah.
But again, encouraging people, I think the more understanding you have, the more you tap into all the aspects of yourself then you can pull on those as you're advocating. And I've always said that really engaging with, whether it's an organization or a hospital or a parent, you should approach it like therapy, like do your assessment, and kind of assess, read the room, as one of my therapists years ago used to say, speak to the listening, and so I think that's important. In advocacy, you have to hear where the other person's coming from. And as therapists, we should have that ability. Some people are shy. People find it hard to believe, but when I was in school, I barely spoke. I mean, I can't even imagine now, but I was more on the introvert kind of side, and in all honesty, I love to be alone. So I won't lie, I have that, but I also can reach out and tap into those pieces of myself. So I encourage that with therapists because I think a lot of people are taught this is your therapy self and this is your other, and you got to keep those boundaries. And the reality is you have to be able to access what you need, parts of who you are. And if you're just presenting unauthentic, that's only going to get you so far. And that's the same thing in advocacy. It's like, be who you are, be passionate about who you are, get the facts, speak to the listening, do your research, and it makes a huge difference.
Well, I think that's all of our questions. Do you have anything else that we didn't cover today that you want to add in?
I don't think I have. I think this is great what you're doing. I can only imagine the amount of information that you have from a variety of people. And I think it's so good because I think that too lets people, it brings more information to them in terms of decision making, because otherwise you are like me. I was here and it's like, oh, I love Mrs. Howery. It cost me $250 a semester to be here. That's where I'm going, I think this is wonderful. And I appreciate that you guys are doing this.
Awesome.
We're really enjoying it.
Yeah, we are. We appreciate it.
It's so cool. I mean, the way we can reach out now that you used to not be able to do is so good.